but
Okay, go.
okay. I'll discuss Parshas Toldos, but we'll discuss some of the other sedras as well, a little bit about Chayesara, and some of the other sedras in the Chumash Bereshis. Okay, in the past I've discussed as to why the Torah speaks so much about Avraham, so much about Yaakov, and so little about Yitzchak. Now, and I mentioned in the two answers that I've mentioned over and over. One answer is that the Torah, Chumash Bereshis, is not a biography of the Avos, but the Torah, in a sense, Chumash Bereshis is keeping the Avos alive, because there are certain things that we have to learn through personal example. So we need the Avos, especially when it comes to character traits. We need to keep the Avos alive to learn from their example. Now, it's possible that Avram and Yitzchak were not as successful in transmitting to future generations their character traits. Consequently, the Torah has to speak about them, keeping them alive, that we should constantly be learning from their example. Whereas Yitzchak, who is the symbol of Kiddush Hashem, of giving one's life over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yitzchak was the one who put his head on the Mizbeach by the Akedah. That's something that Jews throughout the generations have done. So it wasn't so important, so necessary to emphasize the role of Yitzchak. We had to emphasize more the role of Avraham, because while Jews, in a sense, put their heads on the Mizbeach, they were not so, they did not act in the same manner when it came to, in a sense, figuratively tying their children to the Mizbeach. Now, but then I mentioned another reason, and that reason was because Yitzchak, being a korban, being a sacrifice, he is the symbol of Dusha. He's the symbol of holiness, and holiness is always hidden. The Kodesh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies in the Beis HaMikdash, was covered. The Kohen Gadol only one day a year could enter the Holy of Holies. The Beis HaMikdash itself had limitations. Who could enter and under what circumstances they could enter? The more holy something was, the more hidden it had to be. And Yitzchak, being the symbol of holiness, had to be hidden. Consequently, the Torah, in a certain sense, is stingy in the words it uses to talk about Yitzchak. Now, but I would like to suggest another possibility today, similar to one of the other answers, but different. Now, Tosfos in Bava Basra mentions the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam's opinion, and this is not an opinion that is accepted in halacha, but Rabbeinu Tam's opinion is that a ger who brings bikurim does not say the parsha. And even though we paskin that Avram was the ancestor of the geirim, Avram's name is Avram. The name was given to him because he was endowed with the status of Av Hamon Goyim. He was the father of all the nations, and specifically, he is the father, halachically, in many areas, for the geirim, for those who convert to Judaism. But the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam is that Yaakov was not the father of the geirim. Avram was the father of the geirim, but Yaakov was not the father of the geirim. And in the we talk about Arami Oved Avi. What was the Parsha Bikurim? Arami Oved Avi. So the way our sages explained those psukim, the psukim begins by talking about Halavan Ha'arami tried to destroy Yaakov. Bikesh Lakor es hakol. And the Rabbeinu Tam says, inasmuch as Yaakov was not the father of the geirim are the descendants of Abraham, but not of Yaakov. So consequently, a ger, when he brings the Bikurim, he could not say the Parsha of Arami Oved Avi. It's an opinion that is rejected, but that's Rabbeinu Tam's opinion. I wanted to raise the question. According to Rabbeinu Tam, are geirim considered descendants of Yitzchak? In other words, they are descendants of Abraham. They are not descendants of Yaakov, but are they descendants of Yitzchak? Now, the Shagasarye, not necessarily talking about Rabbeinu Tam's opinion, but the Shagasarye is the opinion that the geirim are descendants of Abraham, not of Yitzchak and not of Yaakov. And in a sense, that means they're directly descendants of Abraham, not going through Yaakov and Yitzchak. In a sense, that brings them on a certain level closer to Abraham than your regular Jew. But I want to first understand. So why is it that Avram has this special distinction? That he is considered the patriarch, not only of those who are his genetic descendants, but he is the patriarch, the ancestor, the father of. He's the father of the geirim, of those who convert to Judaism as well, as opposed to Yitzchak and Yaakov on the other hand. Now, there is a big machlokus. In the end of Parshas Hayasara, the Torah tells us that Abraham, after Sarah passed away, married Keturah. Now, who was Keturah? So our sages tell us that Keturah was Hagar. And the Das Geirim Bala Tosfos in Parshas Hayasara asks a question. And that is, Keturah was Hagar, and Hagar was the daughter of Paro, according to our sages. And the halacha is that for 3 generations, up to 3 generations, one cannot marry someone who came from Egyptian lineage. Obviously, that has reference to the Egyptians of ancient times. So the question is, our sages tell us that the Avos, that the patriarchs, they fulfilled the whole Torah. So Das Geirim Bala Tosfos asks, how is it that Avraham, the first of the patriarchs, perhaps the greatest of the patriarchs, was able to marry Keturah. Keturah, okay, she went through conversion, but she still was a mitzvah. And in the first generations, one cannot marry a mitzvah. So how was Avram able to marry Keturah? And Tosfos, gives two answers. One is it was al pi adibur. It was a special dispensation that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through Ruach HaKodesh, informed Avram. Question is why? But I would say the reason is because Avram, and as I'll go in later, had a universal perspective. Besides being the father of the Jewish people, Avram had a universalistic impact, both then and now. And perhaps in order to symbolize that impact, although Torah went through geiris, went through conversion, undoubtedly, but her descendants were not considered halachically Jewish. So in order to give Avram this universalistic perception, perhaps that was the reason. Beruach HaKodesh, he was informed that he should marry Keturah. However, the Das Ken Babal Tosas gives another answer, and that's going to be our focus. And that is that Avram was a ger. Avram himself went through geiris. And the halacha is that a ger can marry a mitzvah, can marry a woman who is from the ancient Egyptians. So because of that, Avram was able to marry a Keturah. Now, honestly, I'm not so disturbed by Tosfos' question. I could suggest that because in the war groups, the Hyksos. The Hyksos was a group from outside Egypt who invaded Egypt, and for many years, they ruled over Egypt. The pharaohs during those years came from the Hyksos, but the Hyksos themselves were not Egyptians. So it's possible that the Paro at the time of Avram was from the Hyksos. There's reason to believe that the Pharaoh at the time of Yosef was from the Hyksos. And I was always wondering whether most of the Erev Rav that accompanied the Jewish people when they left Egypt were themselves not descendant of the Hyksos. Apparently, the Hyksos did have a certain relationship with the Jewish people. And perhaps because after the Hyksos government, the Hyksos pharaohs were overrun. So the Egyptians discriminated and took all kinds of action against the Hyksos. Perhaps some of the Hyksos accompanied the Jewish people when they left Egypt. And they perhaps were the Erev Rav that caused so much trouble for the Jewish people in the desert. But whatever the case, we could give that answer, but the Rishonim do not give that answer. The Brisker Rav was somewhat troubled with the Das Geirim Balatosvus Teretz. And when someone suggested that answer, and it's not mentioned, if that person mentioned it in the name of the Das Geirim Balatosvus, the Brisker Rav rejected it outright. And the Brisker Rav said that Avram was not a ger. Now, what did the Brisker Rav mean by that? I think what the Brisker Rav meant by that is that what is the word ger? What is a ger? A ger is an immigrant. An immigrant is someone who comes and joins another people. But Avram didn't join the Jewish people. Avram didn't join the Jewish people. He was the foundation of the Jewish people. People who converted later joined Avram. Avram didn't join anybody, unless you say he joined the historical Jewish nation. So because of that, Avram was not considered a ger. However, when you look through the words of the Rishonim, Rashi and Sukkah, I think Daf Mem Tes says explicitly that Avram was a ger. And the Gemara tells us the Gemara says, the nobles of the nations gathered, the nations of God of Abraham. So who is that? Why does it say, the Gemara says, Elokei Abraham? Why does it say Elokei Abraham? It doesn't say Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. But Ella Avram Shahayat Chila Legeirim. Avram, who was the forerunner of the geirim. So the pasuk that says, now who are the nobles? Those are the ones, Nidivayam Nesafu, the Nidivayam, those who give themselves over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who are the ones that give themselves over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? That's the geirim. Someone who's not a ger, he didn't give himself over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He was born a Jew. So Am Elokei Avraham, they are identified with the God of Abraham. Why we're not with the God of Yitzchak? Why not with the God of Yaakov? Because Avram was Tchila Legeirim. He was the beginning of the geirim. Simple reading would suggest that perhaps he was the first ger. And this is contrary to what the Bris Rab seemingly suggests. But for many Rishonim, it appears they understood Tchila Geirim is that he set the example for the geirim. Because Avram, whether he was a ger or he wasn't a ger, he was the first Jew. And previously he had not been a Jew. So he served as an example for the geirim of all future generations. And the geirim of all future generations, they are identified with Am Elokei Avraham, with the God of the nation of Avram, more so than anybody else. Now, so and Rashi in Bava Basra, Rashi in Sukkah says that Avram was a ger. He says he nadav libol his gayer. His heart contributed him to go through Geirus. So the question is, it seems that so many Rishonim identify Avram as a ger. We have to understand how the Bris Rab could suggest differently. But in any case, according to most Rishonim, Avram was identified as a ger. Now, why should there be? I mentioned the Shagasarye says that only Avram, not Yitzchak and Yaakov. Why should it be that way? And so, after all, Avram's name is Av Hamon Goyim, as I mentioned. But why is the halacha that way? And the answer is because by being a ger, he was the prototype. He was the symbol of the other geirim. Yitzchak and Yaakov, they did not go through gerus. Now, how are we to understand? How are we to understand the machlokus between the Das Geirim Balatosphus and the Briskerov? I think the way we can understand the machlokus, the argument, is in this manner. What does the word ger mean? I said it meant immigrant. My father would mention in the name of the Ibn Ezra, I don't know where the Ibn Ezra is, but my father would always mention in the name of the Ibn Ezra that the word ger comes from the word gargir, a seed. And a seed is something that doesn't have roots. Now, we have to understand, what does it mean? What does it mean? It doesn't have roots. Why doesn't the ger have roots, or does not yet have roots? Why does a ger not yet have roots? And the reason is because when he joins the Jewish people, except for the fact that he is considered halachically a descendant of Avram, or Yitzchak and Yaakov, as it might be, except for that fact, so he really doesn't have roots in the Jewish people. But he could be considered a ger for another reason as well. Because in order to become a ger, to a large degree, a person has to sever his roots from his former nation. He severs his roots from his former nation. So when you sever your roots, so a person is a ger for one of two reasons. He's either a ger because he severed his roots from his former generations, or he's a ger because he doesn't have roots yet in the Jewish people. And I think perhaps we could suggest that this is the argument between the Brisker Rav and the Das Geirim Balatosphus. In other words, if a ger means he's a ger because he doesn't have roots in the Jewish people yet, so if that's the case, so then Avram could not be considered a ger, because Avram was the foundation of the Jewish people. He was the root of the Jewish people. But if you say Avram is a ger because he severed his relationship with Lech Lecha Me'Yartzecha Me'Moladcha Me'Beis Avicha, through gerus, he completed severing that relationship halachically. So then Avram was certainly a ger. We are almost introduced to Avram with the process of gerus. Lech Lecha Me'Yartzecha Me'Moladcha Me'Beis Avicha. Leave your father's house. Separate yourself from your past. And it's interesting that in the Piyutim in the Haggadah, so right after we finish, we drink the fourth cup. So we there's a piyut there by Yiba Chatzi Halayla. We say Ger Tzedek Kinsachto. The righteous Ger, the righteous proselyte. You made him victorious in the war against the 4 kings, in the war between the 4 and 5 kings. So Avram is referred to as a Ger Tzedek. So the question is, how could Avram, according to the Brisker Rab, and who wrote this piyut? This piyut was written by Yanai. Yanai was someone who wrote poetry that was accepted into the liturgy of the Jewish people. And he lived at the time of the completion of the Talmud, the time of the Chasimus Talmud, in the 4th century. It seems difficult that the Brisker Rab would ignore something that was written by Yanai without even addressing it. But the answer is, it's possible. It's possible that both the Brisker Rab and the Das Kenim Mibala Tosfos agree that a ger is a ger for 2 reasons. On one hand, he's a ger because he severed his relationship from the other nations. But he's also a ger because in entering the Jewish people, he entered a people that he doesn't have roots in. The argument is, why is he allowed to marry the people that other Jews are not allowed to marry? According to Das Kenim Mibala Tosfos, he's allowed to marry because he severed his roots. But in severing his roots, in a sense, he's a first generation away, only 1 generation away from the former nations. So because of that, he's allowed to marry people that other Jews might not be able to marry. However, the shita of the Brisker Rab is, the reason he was able to marry is because he didn't have roots in the Jewish people. Consequently, Avram couldn't be, we could not explain Avram marrying, marrying Keturah on the basis of the fact that he was a ger. Because, yes, he was a ger because he severed his relationship from the past. But he was not a ger in joining the Jewish people because he was the root of the Jewish people. He was the foundation of the Jewish people. And in a sense, Avram is the only one of the Avos who went through the process of gerus. So we could suggest that those who say that only the reason the halach is, according to some, only Avram is an ancestor of the geirim, not Yitzchak and Yaakov, is because Avram himself is a ger. And the geirim, Am Elokei Abraham, the geirim are the nation of Avram. More than anybody else, they are identified with Avram Avinu. So therefore, the halacha is that the geirim are his descendants. Okay, now, and we could say all the other places where it's mentioned, let's say Rashi, and according to Brisker Rab, we could say even what Yanai wrote, when it refers to Avram as a ger tzedek, he's a ger tzedek because he severed his relations from his past. So that's why he's referred to as a ger. Now, so that would explain that opinion. However, I think that we could suggest that when Rabbeinu Tam said that when Rabbeinu Tam said that the Avos, that only Avram, that Avram is an ancestor of the geirim, but not Yaakov. But there are rayas from this week's Sedra, there seems to be an indication from this week's Sedra that Yitzchak was also an ancestor of the Avos. And let me explain why. The Medrash says, Eila Toldos Yitzchak ben Avram. Avram holed es Yitzchak. Very strange Medrash, but the Medrash says, Ben Avram Avram. It takes a few words out of the pasuk and rereads them. The son of Abraham is Abraham. So the Medrash says, we see from here that Yitzchak was also called Abraham. But what does it mean that Yitzchak was called Abraham? I think what it means is that Yitzchak was called Abraham, that he embodied what the name Abraham signifies. Av hamon geirim misaticha. You are the father of all nations, of all people from the nations who come to join the Jewish people. So from here it seems that Yitzchak also had the name Abraham. And it's very interesting that the Medrash Rabbi says another thing. He says, Va'ela shemos b'nei Yisrael, haboim Mitzrayma, Yaakov, es Yaakov ishu beis abo. These are the names of the son of Israel who came to Egypt together with Yaakov. So the Medrash explains that Yaakov was considered B'nai Yisrael. He was considered a son of Israel. Now we know who was Yaakov's father, Yitzchak. So the Medrash says, we see from here that Yitzchak was called both Avram, of course he was called Yitzchak, and he was called Yaakov. So Yitzchak had the names of all the Avos. And we have to understand that also. Why is Yitzchak called the names of all the Avos? Now, I think that when we take a look at the names of Avram and Yisrael, now Avram is Avraham geirim misaticha. Abraham is not just the leader of the Jewish people of all generations, but he's the father of the Jewish people. And when we say he's the father, we don't mean in the same manner as in America they say George Washington is the father of the United States, the founder of the United States. Yes, Avram was the founder, but we see that Avram, in a sense, is considered the ancestor of all Jews. And as we pointed out, according to all Rishonim, he's considered the ancestor of the geirim as well. So it's Av hamon geirim misaticha. But what does the name Yisrael mean? Yisrael was the Yisrael. Targum Onkelos, Rashi explains it differently. But Targum Onkelos says, the Torah says, Ki sarisa im Elohim ve'im anoshim vatuchal. You became an officer. Kadma Elohim. The word Yisrael, sarisa, you became a sar, an officer. You were elevated in position. Vatuchal, and you were successful. So there's a difference between the change of name that Avram had and the change of name that Yaakov had. And Abraham name was changed from Avram to Avraham, the father of the Jewish people, the father of all Jews. Israel, he's the father of the Jews who are genetically, according to Rabbeinu Tam, his descendants. But his position as one of the founders, if I could use that word, of the Jewish people, was not so much as father of the Jewish people. Of course, he is one of the Avos, but he's considered the father of the Jewish people by virtue of the fact that he was the leader, an officer of the Jewish people. In other words, Abraham and Yitzchak has no name change. Why is that? But the answer is very simple. Avraham, once he gets the name Avram, he's no longer called Avram. Why? Because Avram not only became the father of the Jewish people, but he himself became a different person. Whether he was a ger or he wasn't a ger, he became a Jew. So he became a different person. It was a change of identity. Simultaneously, he became a different person, and he became the father of the Jews of all future generations. Yitzchak was born as a father of the Jewish people. Ki v'Yitzchak yikara l'chazara. Yaakov was not born. Yaakov was not born as the father of the Jewish people. The Medrash points out, Reb Chaim points out from the Rambam, that both Esav and Yaakov had equal chance to be the successor of Avram and Yitzchak. But ultimately, Avram, Ki me Yitzchak yikar l'chazara below kol Yitzchak. From Yitzchak will be your descendants, but not all of Yitzchak will be your descendants. No, it's one of Yitzchak's two sons will be the successor of Abraham and Yitzchak. But that was to be determined later on, based on the way they acted. And ultimately, Yaakov was what became the successor. So Yaakov retains his name Yaakov, but he has an additional name, Yisrael. In ancient times, when somebody got a promotion, when Yosef was appointed Mishnah Melech, he got an additional name, Tzafnas Paneach. But he still retained his own name because there wasn't a change of identity. There was just an elevation, a promotion, a position. Yaakov was born a Jew. His identity did not change when he became one of the fathers of the Jewish people. But he assumed a position, an officer, Yisrael. Now, what was the role of Yitzchak? So Avram, in a sense, is the father figure of all Jewish people. Yaakov is only a father figure for those who are genetically his descendants. But for others, but for everybody else, he is the officer, he is the leader of all generations. But Yitzchak is called both. Yitzchak is called Avram. Yitzchak is called Avram, and Yitzchak is also called Yisrael. Why is Yitzchak called Yisrael? Yitzchak is called because Yitzchak represents the Mesorah, the heritage, the continuation, the perpetuation. Avram gives over Avram gives over to Yitzchak. Avram was the first. But there had to be a Masorah. There had to be a linkage. Yitzchak represents the first linkage. Avram is the beginning. Yitzchak is the linkage to future generations. He represents the Masorah more so than Avram represented the Masorah. And it's very interesting. Why is it the Plishtim, they tried to, they destroyed the wells of Yitzchak. They filled it up with earth. With Avram, they stole water from it. But with Yitzchak, they weren't content with just stealing the water. They felt that it was necessary to destroy the wells. Why did they feel that it was necessary to destroy the wells? And the answer is, Avram was somebody they could tolerate. Matter of fact, Avram was revered. Didn't prevent them from stealing from him. But the said, you are a prince of God in our midst. They wanted to be identified with Avram, or more so, they wanted Avram identified with them. But Yitzchak represented a special threat to them, because Yitzchak represented Masorah. That Yitzchak represented the idea that Eretz Yisrael is going to be given over from generation to generation. Why is it that Yitzchak, when he redug the wells that Avram dug, he gave them the same names that Avram gave them? He wanted to show that the Masorah is still alive. The Masorah continues. The heritage continues. The linkage continues. Even though the linkage continues, he added wells, because we have to know that we cannot be limited by what our ancestors did. And this is the lesson of Yitzchak adding wells. But Yitzchak is the symbol of the Masorah. And because of that, he represented a greater threat to a certain degree than Avram. So Yitzchak is the linkage. So on one hand, Yitzchak is the linkage between Avram and himself. And that's why he has the name Avram. But on the other hand, he's a linkage to future generations. He's a linkage to Yaakov. And because of that, he has the name Yisrael. Now, Avram became the father of the Jewish people when he got his new identity. His identity and his position as father of the Jewish people was simultaneous. And in a sense, to be a true father of even those, that's why Avram, more than Yaakov, because Avram, when he became father of the Jewish people, he had a new existence. It wasn't just the position, it was who he was, not just what he did. His new identity and being the father of the Jewish people came simultaneously. Yitzchak wasn't even born yet. Whereas Yaakov, he was Jewish beforehand. There was no change of identity. For him, being the father of the Jewish people, being the leader of the Jewish people, that was position. Yisrael, Sar, officer. And Yitzchak, he was born a father of the Jewish people. But as officer, he only became later, after his mother died. He became an officer of the Jewish people, because that's when he succeeded Avram. When he married Rivka, he became an author, he became a leader of the Jewish people. So Yitzchak has no name change because he was born a father of the Jewish people. But when he became an officer later on, he also got the name, according to the Medrash, of Yisrael. Now Masorah, now Avram, when we take a look at Avram's personality is a universal personality, both in his time and historically. Historically, everybody identifies with Avram. And though Avram is the father of Yishmael, but there is no Masorah between Avram and Yishmael. Avram might be revered and might not be revered, depending on the generation, by the descendants of Yishmael. Avram might be revered and might not be revered by the children of Keturah. But there's no Masorah between him and them. Avram, the Masorah is only through Yitzchak. And Yitzchak does not have that universal personality. Yitzchak defines what the Masorah of Avram was. Doesn't necessarily define the personality of Avram, the universal personality. And Avram was concerned about other people even after he went through conversion. Torah tells us that he went with the Shnei Naravito when he went to the Akedah. But when he returned from the Akedah, when he came to the Akedah, he says, you don't go with me and Yitzchak. Me and Yitzchak, it's something special. It's a unique relationship that we have with God. You don't share that relationship. You might recognize God, but you're not part of the Masorah. But afterwards, when he returns to them, he goes together. Avram is, even after he goes through Geirus, he still has connections with everybody and is concerned about everybody. But Masorah, giving over from generation to generation, that special linkage, that's only through Yitzchak. And Yitzchak defines that. So Yitzchak has the name of Avram in his linkage because there is Masorah only between Avram and Yitzchak. And I think it's interesting, when it comes to Masorah, we have Torah Shebechsav and we have Torah Shebal Peh. The written Torah is open for everybody. Even though Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah, is a secret. Shikos Piyu Kitobim Dadechmi Yayin. Divrei Sofrim, that which was given over orally, represents the love relationship between God and the Jewish people more so than the written Torah. The written Torah is open for everybody to see. And it says that there is no problem with a non-Jew learning the Bible, studying the Bible. But the oral tradition, that wasn't written down. Why wasn't that written down? It was given over orally. It wasn't open for everybody. It represents the private, personal relationship between God and the Jewish people, the hidden relationship. Yitzchak represents that hidden relationship. Yitzchak represents the Masorah, that which was not open for everybody. Masorah, Torah Shebal Peh, more than Torah Shebechsav, represents the Masorah. Certainly we have to give over Torah Shebechsav. Without Torah Shebechsav, you can't give over Torah Shebal Peh. But Torah Shebechsav by itself is something that's open for everybody. But Torah Shebal Peh, that's something that's hidden, that's quiet. And we could suggest that that's why Yitzchak is hidden because Yitzchak, more than the other Avos, he was the initiator, so to say, of that relationship. True, Avram is the initiator of the relationship, but Avram had that universal perspective also. It is Yitzchak that defined what was the Masorah of Avram. He created the linkage between Avram and future generations. And we could say that that's the reason why the Torah, the Torah does not discuss so much about the life of Yitzchak, because Yitzchak represents more than any one of the other Avos that hidden relationship. And we could say that even if we say that Yaakov was not the Av of geirim, Yitzchak was the Av of geirim, because Yitzchak was Hav Hamon Goyim Misaticha, but he also had the name Yisrael because he was a linkage. He was a linkage to Yaakov, and Yitzchak became the linkage to Yaakov. He received the name Yisrael, the position of Yisrael. That was only later on. So that's why the Yitzchak had to have both the name of Avram as well as the name of Yisrael. Okay.
He did. What was that medrash again? The medrash said that Yitzchak had the name of Yisrael and of Abraham.
It said, the medrash says that he had the name Avram because it says Eila Toldos Yitzchak ben Avram. So the medrash cuts the pasuk in half. It says ben Avram, the son of Abraham is Avram.
Okay.
And he also had the name Yisrael because Ve'ela Shmos b'nei Yisrael boy Mitzrayim Eish Yaakov Ish Beis Abo. So Yaakov is listed as like one of the b'nei Yisrael. So, and who is the father of Yaakov? Yisrael.
Okay.
Yitzchak. So Yitzchak was Yisrael.
Okay. Another question was, did Avram have to go to a mikvah for his gerus, or for him was bris milah enough?
It's a question. Some say it's brought down both ways.
Oh, also, I think the Ebenezer about ger and garger is in Tehillim, Perek Lamed Zayin.
Since then, people have mentioned other places as well. Okay, and it's also, I think, on his parish in Chumash, yeah.
Okay. Someone asked, who can a ger marry that a born Jew cannot marry?
But let's say a ger can marry a mamzer, for example.
Or a first generation Egyptian.
Egyptian, that's right.
Someone asked, what did Avram do technically to convert?
It's certainly bris milah. Clearly, the poskim say, the Mefarshim say Kabbalah's mitzvahs, and some suggest that he also went through mikvah.
Okay.
Certainly, the Emos. Well, I shouldn't say certainly, but the Ramban says that the Emos went through mikvah as well.
Okay. Someone asked, what's the status of a child born from a ger and a mamzer?
So a ger and a mamzer, it's a mamzer.
This, I think, is a long thing. I think you may have discussed this last year. If Avram converted his whole household, what happened to their descendants? I think you gave a whole share on that.
A long share on that. Avram, I don't think at the end converted his whole household into observance of all mitzvahs. It was a different type of conversion, I think. Of course, they had to go through bris milah, but it was a special halacha of Beis Avram, rather than being Jewish itself. You understand? Esav was Jewish, obviously. He didn't go through conversion. Avram was Jewish, but I don't think the household of Avram was considered halachically Jewish. They had a special status of Beis Avram.
I'm not sure exactly how to. I don't know if I'm understanding this question. If Yitzchak was Megayer, considered a ger, why was he zocher to have Esav, but Abraham had an Abrahamic descendant Yishmael? I'm not sure I understand that question though.
Okay, well, I'm not sure, but I'll be very clear about it. Abraham had Yishmael before he went through conversion, and Yitzchak was not a ger. He was the father of the geirim, but Yitzchak was not a ger. Well, certainly he didn't go through geirus. Yitzchak certainly didn't go through geirus. So and why he had a son Esav? I mean, everybody. That question could be asked many, many times. Why someone had a son that turned out the way he turned out. That's. But by the way, Esav was halachically considered Jewish, but his descendants were not considered Jewish.
So they don't do bris milah like the Ishmaelim who are
They
allowed
don't
to
do
do
this.
bris
They
milah?
don't do bris milah. They weren't Jewish at all. There was no requirement. By the way, only Yishmael had to have bris milah because he was part of Beis Avram. Yishmael's descendants do not halachically require bris milah. There is a disagreement by the Bnei Torah, the children of Torah, whether they required geirus or they didn't require geirus. So, whether they require bris milah or not. The children of Torah required bris milah, but whether their descendants require bris milah or not is a machlokas Rashi and the Rambam.
And was Keturah considered a geirus?
I would think so.
So then someone's asking, why weren't her children considered Jews?
Because Kibi Yitzchak Yakar L'Chazara, once that was told to Avram, your descendants will be from Yitzchak, everybody else born from him was eliminated from having Tushas Yisrael. But Ace, you understand, Kibi Yitzchak Yakar L'Chazara. From Yitzchak will be your descendants.
Okay, thank you, Ashikach. Those are all the questions that we have.